My family forced me to take the beatings for my siblings' misdeeds, calling it a tradition. When I finally exposed my so-called hero father, he manipulated the entire town into thinking I was the villain. In our family, the youngest child took every physical punishment for the mistakes of the others. From ages 5 to 10, I was struck for things I had nothing to do with. You see, my father inherited this tradition from his own father, a stern military man and decorated Vietnam veteran who ran his home like a training camp. "One person bears the burden so the unit stays strong," Dad would say, polishing his service medals every Sunday morning until they gleamed like fresh wounds. He truly believed he was forging unbreakable family ties, shaping us into one synchronized organism. My mother went along with it because she had grown up in a household where the eldest daughter absorbed everyone's punishment. "It made us closer," she'd claim, her voice as hollow as an abandoned church bell. "We learned to protect each other." I had 3 older siblings, Julian, Marissa, and Eli. They were good kids once, but knowing I would take their punishments changed them. Julian began skipping school, then moved on to shoplifting. Marissa stole Mom's jewelry and sold it for concert tickets. Eli would fail tests on purpose, scribbling obscene drawings instead of answering. During our weekly family meetings, they'd glance at me with that corrosive mix of guilt and relief as Dad reached for his belt, the leather cracking like a starter's pistol in the silence. The rule was simple, but brutal. Every Sunday night at exactly 7 p.m., we held accountability hour. The living room furniture was shoved against the walls to make room, an arena. Dad would read out the week's offenses while I stood barefoot in the center, clad only in a tank top and shorts so the belt could teach the lesson properly. 1 strike for every missed curfew, 5 for a failed test, 10 for any sign of disrespect. The beating continued until Dad felt the family's honor had been restored, his face flushed with righteous rage, the veins in his temples bulging like worms just beneath the skin. My siblings had to watch, that was part of it, learning through my suffering. They sat on the couch in birth order, hands folded in their laps, eyes locked forward. Mom counted the lashes out loud, making sure Dad didn't exceed the prescribed number. 1 for Julian's tardiness, 2, 3, 4 for Marissa's backtalk, 5, 6, as if turning it into math made it medicine instead of torture. By the time I was 7, I flinched constantly. My body lived in a state of high alert. Teachers noticed, but Dad was a well-regarded police officer, with commendations decorating his office wall. Who would believe me? I kept a secret calendar hidden under my mattress, recording who caused each wound using colored pencils. Red for Julian, blue for Marissa, green for Eli. My body became a living chart of their transgressions. Julian's shoplifting phase left 3 jagged marks across my back that looked like claw slashes. Marissa's secret boyfriend earned me a split lip that took 2 weeks to fade. Eli's so-called pranks left me unable to sit properly for days, shifting in my seat while classmates laughed. The breaking point came on my 10th birthday, February 15th, a day that should have meant cake and presents. Instead, Eli had spray-painted vulgar words across the principal's car in daylight, laughing while security cameras recorded everything. That night, as Dad loosened his belt with mechanical calm, Eli actually chuckled. "At least I don't have to deal with this," he said, sprawled on the couch like he was watching a movie, not his little sister's torment. I looked around. Not one of them met my gaze. Julian scrolled on his phone. Marissa picked at her nails. That's when it hit me. They didn't see me as their sister anymore. I was just the pain sponge, a buffer between them and consequence. That night, I did something I'd never dared before. As Dad raised the belt, the buckle catching the light like a warning, I ran. Bare feet pounding on the floor, I bolted through the front door and into the biting February night. I ran 3 blocks to my teacher's house, Mrs. Chang, lungs on fire, wearing nothing but my punishment clothes. She opened the door and found me trembling on her porch, fresh welts blooming across my arms. Without a word, she pulled me inside, wrapped me in a lavender-scented blanket, and made me hot chocolate while I revealed both the fresh wounds and the old scars. She photographed everything with steady, clinical precision. When I told her the full story,
The years of abuse, the punishment proxy system, my father's warped idea of family honor. She called CPS immediately. But she knew the system too well to rely on just my word. "We need more than your word against a cop," she said, her gentle eyes steeled with determination. "We need evidence they can't ignore or spin." So we got creative. Mrs. Chang gave me a tiny voice recorder, no bigger than a USB stick, to tuck into my sock. For 3 weeks, I became a spy in my own home. I recorded everything. Dad's rants about discipline and sacrifice, Mom counting lashes like some twisted lullaby, my siblings whispering about whose turn it was to screw up next. I even caught Eli asking Julian, "Think she'll cry this time? She didn't last week. Maybe Dad's going soft." But when CPS finally arrived, Dad was ready. He had a psychological evaluation on file, conveniently scheduled just 2 weeks before. The timing wasn't random. He'd been building his defense in advance, crafting a narrative brick by brick. The CPS worker, a worn-out woman named Karen, accepted the papers with a weary neutrality of someone who'd seen too much. Her eyes scanned the pages while Dad launched into his performance, his voice cracking in just the right places as he painted me as unstable and attention-seeking. He even brought up the goldfish from 3 years ago, claiming I'd overreacted when it died. Mom chimed in with well-rehearsed concern, adding just enough details to seem genuine. Every glance between them was a cue, every pause a performance beat. I realized they'd rehearsed this, perfected it. Karen asked me to speak with me alone. Dad's hand hovered near his service weapon, a silent assertion of power. He insisted on staying, citing safety concerns. His fingers drummed the holster as he explained how I had become volatile, how my siblings were afraid of me. The lies stacked on top of each other layer by layer until it felt impossible to break through. Then Julian walked in, holding college housing forms needing Dad's signature. His eyes met mine, and for a second, something shifted. Guilt, maybe. Hesitation. But Dad called him over before it could settle. "Tell her what you told me about your sister's behavior," he prompted. Julian looked down at the forms, his college future in the balance. His voice was strained, but damaging. He talked about my mood swings, my fabricated accusations. He never looked at me again. The welts on my back throbbed beneath my shirt. I could have lifted it then and there, shown Karen the truth, but Dad's eyes locked on mine, promising retribution, not just for me, but for Julian too. His scholarship, his shot at freedom, all hanging by a thread. So I stayed quiet. Karen took notes, her pen scratching the page, while Dad poured coffee and played the devoted father. He even brought out old photo albums, birthday parties, camping trips, scenes from a life carefully curated to bury the rot underneath. Then the doorbell rang, Mrs. Chang's familiar knock. But Mom intercepted it, phone buzzing with a sudden emergency at Marissa's school. Another planned diversion, another stall. Eli arrived home to find the living room already staged. Without hesitation, he joined the act, backing every lie and adding his own flourishes about my jealousy and my need for drama. The recorder in my sock felt like a brick. Proof of everything sat in my bedroom just upstairs. But getting up now would look like guilt, like flight. Karen noticed how I flinched when Dad moved too fast, but she misunderstood. She saw instability, not trauma. When she raised her camera to take photos, she wasn't capturing evidence of abuse. She was building a case for my mental deterioration. The very system meant to protect me was being wielded like a weapon. Even school became hostile ground. My counselor, Mrs. Moreno, who used to seem so concerned, suddenly grew cold after Dad offered to write her husband a glowing recommendation for the police academy. Her empathy vanished. In its place were polite suggestions that I should focus on my education and try not to stir up more trouble.
The assistant principal began documenting my so-called disruptions, even though I hadn't changed anything about my behavior. Meanwhile, Mom's campaign stretched beyond our home. She told worried neighbors I was going through a phase, drawing comparisons to the time our goldfish died. Mrs. Ellison, who used to wave during her morning walks, stopped making eye contact. The cashier at the corner market, once chatty,
now rushed through every transaction. Our family's crisis had become neighborhood gossip, and I was the villain in every version, a troubled girl tormenting a model police family. Even the family group chat became ammunition. My siblings took screenshots of messages I'd sent in pain or desperation, stripping away the context to make me look unstable. A text like, "I can't take this anymore," written after a brutal beating, was used as evidence of an emotional breakdown. Marissa posted about our family struggles on her private account, carefully curating posts that painted me as volatile. She'd been chronicling my episodes for months without my knowledge. Mrs. Chang's after-school check-ins soon attracted scrutiny. Someone filed an anonymous complaint with the school, accusing her of showing inappropriate interest in a student. She faced questions about boundaries, while Dad played the concerned father, deeply troubled by the influence of outside adults on his already fragile daughter. The only adult who truly believed me was being picked apart, discredited piece by piece. Dad's control bled into every corner of my life. He booked a psychological evaluation with Dr. Lennox, his regular poker buddy. The appointment card was pinned to the fridge with a magnet, a daily reminder that he held every key. Insurance paperwork needed his signature. Field trip forms needed his approval. Every safety net for kids had a trapdoor custom-built for a respected officer. Exhaustion settled into my bones. I nodded off in history class, waking to find Mr. Yates documenting it as a disciplinary concern. Potential substance abuse was added to my school record, another brick in the fortress Dad was building to lock me out of credibility. My grades plummeted, not because I didn't care, but because survival took every ounce of energy I had. But the failing grades only reinforced the official story, a child in decline, acting out, unraveling. Uncle David had once offered me an escape. He'd pulled me aside at Christmas and quietly said, "If you ever need somewhere safe, my door's always open." But when I finally called, his voice was strained, guarded. Dad had casually mentioned David's expired green card during a chat at a cookout. The threat was obvious. Help me and risk deportation. David had a wife, a son. He couldn't afford to become a casualty. Another lifeline cut. Another ally neutralized by Dad's strategic pressure. The town turned on me in 1,000 subtle ways. I felt it in the cereal aisle at Fairway, in the murmurs behind me, in the way parents clutched their kids tighter as I walked past. I had become a character in a story I didn't write, the unstable daughter of a noble cop screaming for attention through outrageous lies. Even my classmates absorbed it. I overheard them parroting dinner table opinions. "My mom says she's just going through something." A polite way of erasing my pain. Dad's lies evolved. He told the school I'd snuck out past curfew the night before, but Eli's Instagram story from that same hour showed Dad watching TV at home, disproving his own timeline. And yet, proving just one lie didn't help. It made me look conniving, like I was spinning my own false version with suspicious precision. My best friend Noelle drifted away. Her mom had asked Dad for help securing a restraining order against her ex. After that, I stopped getting invites. Noelle's apologetic texts became infrequent, then stopped altogether. Another friendship silenced through favors and veiled threats. The truth became dangerous. When I showed that Dad had lied about one detail, it backfired. It exposed that I'd once snuck out months ago to avoid a beating. Instead of exposing abuse, it fueled the delinquent teen narrative. My escape became the lie. My defense became my downfall. Mrs. Chang's hug after successfully pushing back my court date was photographed by someone and submitted as proof of inappropriate closeness. Even comfort was twisted into evidence. Dinner turned into a staged performance. Dad would place a heavy hand on my shoulder as he talked about getting through this as a family, his fingers pressing into the exact bruises he'd left. His words sounded supportive, compassionate even, to anyone listening. But my skin knew the truth. Mom served my favorite dishes and spoke calmly about treatment plans and intervention strategies, as if my behavior were some clinical puzzle to solve, as if I weren't sitting right there, raw and shattered. The recorder caught all of it. Every lie, every twist of the knife beneath a smile. But to retrieve it meant risking everything. Dad had started randomly searching my room under the guise of checking for self-harm tools or drug paraphernalia. He said it was about safety. We both knew it was about control.
The evidence that could save me sat in a shoebox beneath old sketches, close enough to touch, yet too dangerous to retrieve. With every passing day, the recordings became both more valuable and more unreachable. Karen's CPS report would arrive soon. She had left our house with pages of notes supporting Dad's carefully constructed version of events. Photos of me flinching, testimony from my siblings, school reports reflecting declining grades, and that single incident of me nodding off in class. A tidy paper trail painting me as a troubled girl spiraling out of control, not a desperate child trying to survive. The system had folded in on itself, protecting the abuser while preparing to punish the victim again. Mrs. Chang had her own battles to fight now. The school administration was scrutinizing her judgment, her ethics, her intent. She wasn't allowed to contact me directly anymore. Every interaction had to go through official channels Dad could watch. The woman who wrapped me in a lavender-scented blanket that freezing night was being pried out of my life by the very institutions she once trusted to save me. My siblings avoided me at home, guilt curdling into cruelty. Julian buried himself in college applications. Marissa clung to her friends. Eli treated it all like a sitcom, cracking jokes about crazy little sisters and making a show of mocking me whenever his friends came over. They'd made their choice, and it wasn't me. The family unit Dad claimed to be preserving had long since splintered. What remained was a hollow facade held together by complicity and silence. The town had already made its judgment. A decorated officer like Dad, with plaques and letters of commendation lining his office walls, simply couldn't be the man I described. But his youngest daughter? She was the perfect candidate for a cautionary tale. Mentally unstable, needy, given to wild accusations born of jealousy or delusion. That version of me was easy to believe. The truth was harder to swallow. So they chose the lie. Every day brought fresh humiliations, more so-called proof of my unraveling. And every night I fell asleep knowing the real story. The proof of it was upstairs in a shoebox under faded paper and fabric scraps. The recorder held their voices, their cruelty, their confessions whispered between moments of mundane normalcy. But retrieving it was a risk I couldn't take. Dad's random searches of my room were becoming more frequent. He claimed concern for my safety, checking for pills, blades, anything dangerous. But we both knew what he was really hunting for. The walls were closing in. The support I once had was gone. My allies were neutralized, silenced, or too afraid. The narrative Dad had crafted hardened like concrete around me. I was the antagonist in my own story. And Dad no longer needed to raise a hand. He'd evolved. His new tools were charm, reputation, and a well-fed network of believers. The following week, he started coaching basketball at school. Gabriel's team practiced in the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Dad strolled in with a whistle and clipboard like he'd been doing it forever. I watched from the bleachers, invisible and nauseous, as he demonstrated shooting form with fluid confidence. The boys immediately gravitated toward him. He remembered names, favorite NBA players, even dropped Space Jam quotes when someone made a good shot. That had been our movie once, Saturday mornings on the couch. The memory now stung like betrayal. Here was the man who'd weaponized family bonds, now preaching teamwork and sportsmanship to a dozen 12-year-olds. He high-fived them after drills, praised their hustle, even gently corrected their stances. Not once did he raise his voice. The parents clapped from the sidelines, proud and grateful that Officer Walker was giving his time to the youth. They didn't know that same hand offering encouragement had left bruises days earlier. Gabriel flourished under Dad's coaching. His natural skill finally had direction. He was scoring more, leading plays, even helping newer kids with their shots. After games, Dad would ruffle his hair with pride. So normal, so loving, it made my stomach twist.
The team started winning games they used to lose, and Dad became a hero in the basketball parents group chat. I tried explaining everything to my English teacher, Mr. Allen. One afternoon during lunch, I finally found the nerve. He listened quietly as I told him about the beatings, the Sunday night rituals, how Dad had orchestrated Karen's visit to his advantage. He nodded as I spoke until I mentioned that Dad was coaching Gabriel's team. That's when something shifted in Mr. Allen's face. "He seems talented at playing different roles," he said slowly.
The supportive coach with the basketball team and the abuser at home. That duality wasn't lost on me. It was telling how Mr. Allen's expression subtly shifted when I mentioned the coaching. That small flicker of doubt showed just how effectively Dad's good deeds distorted the truth. His own son played on that team. He loved Coach Walker's practices. The conversation ended with Mr. Allen gently suggesting I meet with the school counselor to talk through some family adjustment issues. Not abuse, not trauma, just a girl struggling to adjust. Dad's influence oozed through the school like spilled ink. He volunteered for Career Day, showing up in full uniform to preach about service and civic duty. He joined the PTA Safety Committee, offering expert insights on how to protect kids. He even launched a mentorship initiative through the station, targeting at-risk youth in need of strong role models. Each act of charity layered his armor thicker. Each public gesture painted me as delusional. Who could believe a decorated officer and local mentor was beating his daughter behind closed doors? The psychological evaluation with Dr. Lennox took place in a beige office that smelled like leather and quiet resignation. Dad had coached me beforehand, resting his hand on my shoulder with practiced gravity. "Be honest about your struggles," he said, voice full of pretend concern. Dr. Lennox asked about my sleep, my appetite, my family relationships. I tried redirecting the conversation toward the abuse. He kept guiding it back to my emotional regulation, coping mechanisms, and externalization of blame. He showed me ink blots that looked like soggy Rorschach tests, asked me to draw my family, and handed me mood questionnaires that turned pain into checkboxes. When I mentioned the beatings, he nodded gently and asked, "How does that make you feel?" Never once did he ask whether they had actually happened. The session ended with a prescription for mild anxiety meds and a recommendation for family therapy. Dad thanked him like they were lifelong friends, which they essentially were. Another performance flawlessly executed. Cracking Mom's password was easier than I expected. Her muscle memory traced our old dog's name, followed by Marissa's birthday, something she'd probably used for years. I waited until the house fell silent, my pulse hammering in my ears, then slipped to the family computer. The browser history told me everything I feared. Troubled teen camps in Utah, wilderness therapy programs, residential treatment centers. She was planning to send me away. That night, I used her saved credit card info to order a book about surviving child abuse. I had it shipped to school, not home. The confirmation email went to her inbox, but I deleted it the second it came through, praying she wouldn't notice the charge among all the others. The book arrived 3 days later, in a plain manila envelope. I devoured it in study hall, learning about trauma, gaslighting, how to document abuse safely. Knowledge became my armor, thin, but better than nothing. When I finally stumbled across Marissa's private account, I felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. She had been documenting our family's dysfunction for months, crafting her own version of events. Videos of me flinching were labeled Oscar-worthy drama. Screenshots of our texts were cropped to erase context. There was even a clip of me crying after a brutal punishment, captioned with eye-roll emojis and comments about hormones. Her followers, mostly classmates, flooded the posts with agreement. "She's definitely unstable. I'd lose it too if I had to live in that house. My sister is the same way." Marissa had turned my trauma into social currency. While I gathered bruises, she gathered sympathy. The betrayal hurt more than any belt ever had. My attempt to record that again, this time with Mrs. Chang's old phone, nearly got me caught. I'd tucked it in my backpack and turned on the voice recorder at dinner, praying I'd catch one of his threats. But phones aren't as discreet as professional mics. A soft beep echoed from the kitchen, just as Dad was launching into a lecture about how I'd let the family down. His head snapped toward the sound like a wolf catching a scent. His eyes narrowed, scanning the room. I scrambled in my bag, pretending to look for homework while frantically trying to stop the recording. Dad rose slowly, every movement deliberate. He rounded the table, each step measured. "What was that sound?" he asked, voice calm, eyes sharp. His whole body tensed like a coiled spring. I pulled out a crumpled math worksheet. "I was trying to use the calculator app," I said, forcing my voice to stay level.
He didn't believe me. I saw it in his eyes, but for now, he let it slide. The next morning, he implemented new phone rules. All devices had to be turned in before dinner and kept in a basket in his bedroom overnight. For our safety, he said, to prevent cyberbullying and ensure restful sleep. Mom immediately agreed, praising his proactive parenting style. My siblings groaned but complied. They knew better than to challenge him. Resistance only escalated things. Another means of documentation? Gone. The school pickup changed without warning. During math class, the front office called me down. The secretary smiled as she explained that Dad had updated my emergency contact information. He was now the sole person authorized for early dismissals, medical issues, or any situation involving parental input. Mrs. Chang's name had been scrubbed from every form. The secretary seemed pleased, another father stepping up for his troubled child. The nurse, Mrs. Bennett, who had once quietly offered ice packs and whispered questions about my bruises, made her decision clear: silence. Her husband's construction firm had just lost a major police department contract. Since then, her demeanor had cooled. She still documented injuries, but now her reports included phrases like "claims to bruise easily" and "stories inconsistent with reported cause." Finally, I got the recorder back. It was during one of Dad's community policing events. While he posed for photos and shook hands in the town square, I crept into my room, nerves on fire. I slid the shoebox from under a pile of forgotten art projects and progress reports. The recorder was there, unassuming, silent, deadly. My hands trembled as I pressed play. 2 weeks of home life spilled out of the tiny speaker. Dad discussing strategy with Mom, Eli laughing at my punishments, Marissa complaining about all the drama I was supposedly creating. Each voice etched itself into the digital memory, proof of collusion, cruelty, complicity. But that wasn't all. The recorder had picked up Dad and Mom rehearsing for the CPS visit. Word for word, they practiced their script. Dad repeated his talking points about my behavioral decline, his concern for my mental health, even decided where his voice should crack for maximum sympathy. Mom chimed in with tweaks, directing his performance like a seasoned coach, refining an actor's monologue. They knew Karen would be coming before she was even assigned. Late at night, the recorder had captured something unexpected. Dad, alone in the living room, speaking into the quiet. Whether to himself or to his long-dead father, I couldn't be sure. His voice was low, almost broken, as he talked about carrying the torch, about discipline as strength, about breaking weak links to forge stronger chains. There was pain in his words, real pain, deeper than he had ever inflicted on me, and somehow that made it worse. I learned that Mom had her own hidden archive. One night while Dad was out on patrol, she retrieved a small recipe box from above the fridge. I watched from the hallway as she opened it, flipping through index cards marked with dates. I couldn't see what was written, but her face collapsed and tears slid silently down her cheeks. When she heard Dad's car in the driveway, she quickly tucked it away and wiped her face, smoothing her expression before he walked through the door. Grandma came for her monthly visit, balancing her usual tray of cookies and tightly wound tension. She'd always been Dad's greatest defender, applauding his commitment to family and tradition. But that visit, something changed. When she saw me, a flicker passed across her face, a shift, a recognition. She knew. She had always known more than she admitted. During dinner, she kept glancing between Dad and me, her lips parting like she wanted to speak, but couldn't.
Later, while everyone else was yelling at a football game in the living room, I found her in the kitchen rinsing dishes. I showed her the bruises, finger-shaped, unmistakable. Her hands were still in the soapy water. For one breathless second, I thought she might do something. She dried her hands, reached up and gently cupped my face. "If I interfere," she whispered, "he'll cut me off. I won't be allowed to see any of you again." That was her choice. Not silence, not complicity, just neutrality dressed up like survival. But to me, it felt like betrayal. I began using Eli's guilt as leverage. I forgave him for things he hadn't even apologized for, offered soft smiles when he expected glares, gave him absolution before he earned it. And he began to crack. The confusion in Eli's eyes became an opening. One evening, during one of his more vulnerable moments, I asked to borrow his phone, said I just needed to check Instagram, that my battery was dead. He handed it over without hesitation. The password was already entered. His camera roll held more than I expected. There were videos of family dinners where Dad's threats simmered just beneath the surface, and close-up photos of my bruises, captured in secret, maybe out of guilt, maybe just morbid curiosity. He'd even recorded snippets of accountability hour from the stairs when he was supposed to be in his room. Eli had been documenting everything, too. Whether for evidence or entertainment, I couldn't tell. A few days later, I ran into Dad's partner, Officer McCarthy, at the corner cafe where local cops got unlimited refills. He was sitting alone, scrolling through his phone, his face drawn and heavy with exhaustion. I ordered a hot chocolate and sat at the table next to his, making light conversation about the weather while cataloging every flicker in his expression. The moment I mentioned Dad, his posture shifted. He changed the subject to something safer, more neutral. But in that subtle discomfort, I saw the crack, a break in the thin blue wall. He let it slip, carelessly, that some officers at the station had started asking questions about Dad's home life. Nothing official, just side conversations about stress, discipline, and whether everything was okay at home. He quickly backtracked, assuring me everyone stood behind Dad. But it was too late. Doubt had found its way into the precinct. Then Marcus did something unexpected. Between classes, during a chaotic passing period, he slipped a folded sheet of paper into my hand without saying a word. I unfolded it in the girls' bathroom and nearly dropped it. It was a printed copy of his college admissions essay. The title, Watching Injustice, a Personal Reflection on Family Dynamics. My throat tightened. He had written about our household, not in specifics, not in names, but the truth bled through every elegant sentence. He wrote about systemic unfairness, about growing up in a home where one child carried the punishment for the others, about the guilt of standing by while someone else took the pain. His words were articulate and aching, raw with moral conflict. He described the weight of privilege, how it rotted when earned at someone else's expense. He even included a section about breaking cycles, choosing integrity over convenience. In the final paragraph, he vowed to use his education to help others trapped in similar situations. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever receive. Then came a call that nearly upended everything. Mom's estranged sister, Aunt Caroline, reached out after years of silence. Her voice stirred something in Dad I hadn't seen in a long time, fear laced with fury. She lived 2 states away and had cut ties with Mom years ago after a messy inheritance fight, but somehow she'd heard about our situation, maybe through the town rumor mill or online, and she offered to step in. Temporary custody, just until things settled. Dad responded with legal precision. He filed paperwork claiming Caroline was attempting to alienate me from her loving family. He unearthed court records from her divorce, flagged her past struggles with depression, questioned her fitness to care for anyone. The move cost me a required therapy session, rescheduled due to legal proceedings, and that absence was marked as non-compliance in my file. Every move toward freedom came with consequences attached. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chang's finances deteriorated. Legal fees devoured her savings. She maxed out credit cards she'd sworn were for emergencies only. She'd hired the best family lawyer she could afford, but Dad had the police union's legal defense fund behind him. The imbalance was glaring. His team arrived at every hearing with boxes of documentation, polished witnesses, and practiced arguments. Mrs. Chang's lawyer did what he could, but heart and truth couldn't compete with money and power, not in a courtroom like ours. Then there was the pizza shop. I'd gone there chasing a brief illusion of normalcy, greasy slices, arcade lights, something warm in a cold world. I was sitting quietly in the corner booth when Dad walked in with Gabriel's basketball team, celebrating another win. The moment our eyes met across the room, the entire energy shifted. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He crossed the dining room with slow, calculated steps. "Are you supposed to be out alone, sweetheart?" he asked loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. The teenage staff behind the counter exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene. Other diners turned to look. Then came the follow-up, his voice coded in concern. "Have you taken your medication today? Did your guardian approve this outing?" Each question was not just for me. They were for the audience, the customers, the employees, the world. Whispers started immediately. Another performance, another scene, and I was the unhinged daughter once again, delusional, defiant, unstable. And Dad? Just a caring parent, a local hero trying to protect his fragile, troubled child.
When I tried to leave, he stepped in front of me, blocking the path with practiced calm. He insisted on calling Mrs. Chang to verify that I had permission to be out. When I tried to push past him, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, firm enough to hurt, but not enough to bruise. The assistant manager, a teenager barely older than Julian, hovered by the soda machine, uncertain and anxious. What was he supposed to do? Confront a well-known cop, a regular customer, a youth coach, or trust the word of the troubled girl half the town whispered about? Eventually, he asked Dad to let me go. Dad released my wrist with exaggerated concern, placing a hand on my shoulder as he reminded the staff to call if she starts acting strangely. Mrs. Chang returned from administrative leave with shackles disguised as policy. She couldn't speak to me privately, couldn't offer support beyond the bare minimum expected of any teacher. Every interaction had to go through official channels, documented, monitored, reviewed. The warmth we once shared had been cordoned off behind professional boundaries. Worse, during her absence, the district had hired a long-term substitute, Dad's cousin, Ms. Whitmore. She spent more time taking mental notes than teaching English, watching me like a hawk, reporting everything back to him. I started sleeping in Mrs. Chang's laundry room. She couldn't invite me to stay, there was a no-contact order, but she also couldn't lock her back door, and if I happened to find my way inside during the night, well, she was a deep sleeper. The understanding was unspoken, but mutual. I curled up between the washer and dryer, the rhythmic tumble of laundry cycles lulling me to sleep like no lullaby ever could. Meanwhile, Dad remodeled my bedroom. Part of the fresh start, he said. He painted the walls a bright, forced yellow, bought new furniture, hung up motivational posters with phrases like, "Perseverance builds character," and "Grow through what you go through." He posted the transformation on social media, before and after photos with glowing captions about creating a healing space for his struggling daughter. Friends and relatives flooded the comments with praise, heart emojis, and admiration for his devotion. Diana began to unravel. The pressure in our house had become unbearable, and it was seeping through her skin. I started wearing long sleeves, even when it was hot out. I saw the edge of a scar one day as her sleeve rode up during dinner, thin, deliberate cuts running parallel down her arm, not for attention, hidden, controlled. Later that evening, she cornered me in the bathroom, her face streaked with mascara and tears. She blamed me for everything, for Mom's constant stress, for Dad's hair-trigger temper, for the house no longer feeling like home. She showed me more of her scars, some fresh, some healed into pale ridges. She said, "These," pointing, "these are your fault, if you just kept your mouth shut." Her pain was real, her anger misplaced, another casualty in Dad's war. Mrs. Chang's investigation triggered a wave of fallout. Mrs. O'Kane, the teacher in the classroom next door, had suspected something but never reported it.
When the administration discovered her failure to follow mandatory reporting laws, she was placed on leave pending investigation. Her husband lashed out, furious that her inaction was now threatening their financial stability, their kids' future. Their marriage cracked under the pressure. Another family torn apart just for being close to mine. And still, I kept recording. Every conversation, every veiled threat, every lie, every cold calculation. Even as the collateral damage piled up, I told myself it was necessary, that exposing the truth would prevent even more harm in the long run. But when I watched Mrs. O'Kane packing up her classroom, her young daughter tugging at her hand and asking, "Why is Mommy get in trouble?" I felt something gnaw at me. Was I becoming like him, justifying harm for the sake of a greater good? Eli found me alone one afternoon, sitting on the back steps behind the gym. His usual bravado was gone. He sat beside me, quiet for a long time, then asked, What if you're remembering it worse than it really was?" His voice was hesitant, unsure. Like trauma can mess with memory, right? Make things seem darker than they were? The question hit harder than any belt ever had. I stared at him, stunned into silence. For a second, I questioned everything. Had I distorted it, painted memories in the wrong shade? But then I remembered. The calendar under my mattress, marked in red, purple, green. The scars that matched those days, the recordings that held their laughter, their lies, their plans, the photo evidence, the CPS script rehearsal, Dad's rants in the dark, Diana's tears. No, I hadn't imagined any of it.
My memories might have been shaped by trauma, but they were still true. The detail about Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Chang's cousin, acting as the substitute teacher revealed just how deep Dad's reach extended in this town. And Diana's self-harm, quiet, hidden, carefully managed, added another painful layer to the household wreckage. Watching her crumble made me question whether the truth was worth the collateral damage it left behind. I told Eli once, quietly, "The worst kind of abuse is the kind that makes you question your own reality." He didn't have a reply. He just stared at me, torn between loyalty and uncertainty, his identity buckling under the weight of both. Then the article dropped. It appeared online the next morning, measured, restrained, and carefully worded to avoid lawsuits while still asking sharp questions about what was happening in our home. It praised Dad's heroic service record, but it also acknowledged the whispers, concerns from community members, murmurs from school staff, traces of unease in the official reports. Dad read it at breakfast, his jaw tensed with every line. He didn't say much, but the clenched silence said everything. By that afternoon, his counterstrike was already in motion. He booked interviews with friendly reporters. He brought Mom with him, both of them dressed in soft colors and solemn expressions. They spoke about the challenges of raising a teenager with emotional instability, the toll of law enforcement work on families, the danger of false narratives. Mom teared up right on cue. Dad's voice cracked when he talked about how much he loved us. The performance was flawless. Back at school, the fallout was instant. Some classmates glared at me in the hallways, muttering "traitor" under their breath. Others left anonymous notes in my locker, short, shaky messages about their own family secrets, their own bruises hidden beneath sleeves. Quiet allies in a battlefield full of ghosts. The basketball team showed their loyalty in bold letters. They showed up to practice in matching t-shirts that read "Blue Lives Matter." Gabriel wore his with pride, the words stretched taut across his chest like a shield. Then the journalist found something else. Public records showed Dad repeatedly volunteering for high-risk shifts immediately after our accountability hour Sundays. High-speed chases, domestic calls, drug busts, anything violent, chaotic, dangerous. Officer McCarthy brought it up again, offhandedly, during another encounter. How Dad pushed too hard after those weekends, as if he needed to bleed too. It complicated everything. The recordings of Dad's late-night monologues revealed even more. In those quiet hours, talking to no one, or maybe to his long-dead father, he begged for forgiveness, for slipping, for failing to maintain the discipline that he'd inherited. He spoke about weakness like it was a disease, about his own childhood, the bruises hidden under his uniform, mirroring mine beneath my school clothes. Understanding didn't excuse it, but it made the destruction feel less like a personal cruelty and more like inherited machinery. During a tense family meeting, I finally played one of the recordings. Dad's voice echoed in the dining room, calm, rehearsed, plotting with Mom, practicing how he'd lie to Karen, deciding when to let his voice crack. The color drained from his face. Mom reached across the table, trying to grab the recorder, but I yanked it back, letting the words hang in the air like a verdict. Julian shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. Marissa covered her ears, refusing to listen to the evidence of her own complicity. Dad's composure shattered. He slammed his fist on the table. "How long have you been recording us? When did you become so damn deceptive?" The irony of him accusing me of deception, while his own voice laid out a map of manipulation, wasn't lost on anyone. Julian stood up and walked out of the room. His college essay still sat folded in my pocket like a secret pact. The meeting dissolved into chaos. That night, Dad parked his patrol car outside Mrs. Chang's house and just sat there. Hours passed. I watched through the laundry room window, heart racing as his silhouette remained unmoving, radiating barely contained fury. Eventually, Mrs. Chang called it in, reporting him for harassment. The officers who responded were quiet, cautious, their words carefully chosen. They convinced him to leave after a hushed exchange on the lawn. But his presence lingered, a threat that didn't need words. The next morning, it all escalated again. Child Protective Services arrived with a court order for an emergency custody evaluation. Dad had filed new paperwork, claiming Mrs. Chang was manipulating me, that she had an inappropriate interest, that I was being coached into false accusations. The new caseworker wasn't Karen. She was younger, sharper, and arrived with her mind already made up. She'd reviewed Dad's carefully compiled evidence, seen the photos of me crying, read the notes about my academic decline, and now she stood in our living room, clipboard in hand, already believing she knew the truth.
I showed her everything. The bruises, fresh and faded. I played select portions of the recordings. I laid out my notes, my color-coded calendar, my documentation with desperate precision. She took it all in silently, pen scratching across her clipboard, her expression unreadable, but far from convinced. A teenager with trauma, making allegations against a decorated officer, that required more than hidden recordings and careful journal entries. She questioned why I'd waited so long to speak up, why I'd recorded my family in secret, what I hoped to gain by destroying my father's reputation. Every question felt like a locked door slamming shut behind me. Then Marcus broke. During the social worker's individual interviews, he sat stiffly in a living room chair, his college acceptance letter tucked in his pocket like a charm against the weight of truth. When asked about our family dynamics, he started slowly, his words deliberate, each one chosen like it might tip a scale. He described years of systemic violence, the guilt he carried for letting me take the hits, the moral rot of standing by in silence, of thriving while I suffered. Coming from him, it landed differently. The golden boy, the firstborn, the one no one would question. His confirmation gave my truth a weight I alone couldn't carry. Dad's face changed as Marcus spoke. First disbelief, then simmering rage, then something approaching grief. He tried to interrupt, claiming Marcus was confused, brainwashed by my lies. But Marcus simply took out his phone. On the screen were videos he'd quietly captured over the years. Gabriel sobbing after a Sunday night beating. Me applying concealer to hide fresh welts before school. Mom counting out strikes in her flat, mechanical voice. It was all there. Undeniable. Diana's reaction was volcanic. She stood and screamed that Marcus had betrayed the family, that he'd destroyed everything for my pathetic drama.
She yanked up her sleeves, exposing the lattice of scars along her arms, shouting that they were my fault. The social worker wrote it all down. Self-harm, fractured loyalties, the way abuse warps love into something almost unrecognizable. Our family collapse played out like a tragedy she'd witnessed a dozen times before. The police department opened an internal investigation, not out of conscience, but to mitigate liability. Officers who once shook Dad's hand at PTA meetings now kept their distance. Some remembered vague concerns they'd never voiced aloud. His partner, McCarthy, quietly admitted he'd sensed something was wrong for years, but chose silence over suspicion. The union still provided attorneys, but their enthusiasm dulled as the evidence stacked higher. The man they had backed so confidently began to crack under the pressure. Dad's public image, his civic halo, crumbled like weather-worn stone. I moved between Mrs. Chang's house and temporary foster placements while the court process churned forward. Hearings were set, delayed, and rescheduled. Motions filed and countered. The recordings were challenged, authenticated, challenged again. My life became a stack of paperwork and court dates. Every day brought a new document, a new interview, a new psychological evaluation. And the cost, financial, emotional, bled into everyone. Dad's legal bills devoured our savings. Mom began pawning jewelry. Marcus's college fund was redirected to attorneys. Even Eli chipped in, washing cars, mowing lawns. The same abuse that once chained us in silence now shackled us in shared ruin. But Mrs. Chang never wavered. She came to every hearing, took notes at every meeting. She documented everything, even when it meant more strain. She fought the communication restrictions, even as they cost her time, money, energy. She borrowed against her retirement, picked up a second job tutoring. Other teachers began quietly contributing to a fund for her legal support. They understood what it cost to stand up for someone like me. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived like a thundercloud. The courtroom was packed. Law enforcement on one side, educators and advocates on the other. The division was stark. Uniforms versus empathy. I testified for hours. I told the story I lived, laying it out with surgical clarity. The defense tried to painting me as vindictive, emotionally unstable, manipulative, but the recordings cut through their narrative like a scalpel. Then Dad took the stand. His uniform was immaculate. His medal shone beneath the sterile courtroom lights. He admitted to using physical discipline, but denied anything resembling abuse. He spoke about tradition, about values, about honor. The same recycled mantras I'd heard every Sunday night. But then the prosecution played the late-night recordings. His own voice, tired, ragged, speaking to his dead father, confessing that he had become what he once feared, that he had crossed lines he couldn't uncross. The courtroom fell silent. He looked smaller then, almost human. But stripped of the narrative he'd spent decades crafting, he had no armor left. It came down, in the end, to credibility and interpretation. Evidence versus reputation.
She acknowledged the dysfunction. The judge recognized the pattern: physical punishment, psychological manipulation, a household ruled by fear. But she also cited the complexity of our family dynamics, the absence of severe bodily harm, the lingering questions about my intentions and timing. Her ruling was mixed. Dad would face criminal charges for assault, reduced ones, not the full weight the prosecution had sought. Custody would be decided in family court, separately. Mom chose him. Despite everything revealed, every recording, every bruise, every testimony, she stood beside him at sentencing, her hand clasped in his as the judge read the verdict. 2 years probation, court-mandated counseling, loss of custody, but retention of parental rights. The police department suspended him pending review. He wasn't fired, just reassigned,
pushed into desk duty, paperwork, sidelined respect. The hero cop became a cautionary whisper behind break room doors. Marissa went to live with one of Mom's cousins, space she desperately needed. Her self-harm worsened before it got better, but therapy helped. Months later, she sent me a letter, not an apology, not really, but a quiet recognition that we'd both been injured in different ways by the same system. Eli remained with our parents. He was too young for alternative placements, but now he had eyes on him, regular visits from social workers, unannounced check-ins. He kept playing basketball. He still won games, but the joy in his face was different, muted, complicated by the man coaching him. Julian chose distance. He worked 2 jobs to afford a tiny apartment near his college campus. Sometimes he visited. We didn't talk about the years he stayed silent or the cost I paid for his protection. Some wounds weren't meant for words. But he showed up, and in its broken, imperfect way, that mattered. The adoption process with Mrs. Chang wasn't easy. Red tape and bureaucratic hurdles nearly broke her resolve. Background checks, home inspections, legal requirements. Every step came with a fee she couldn't afford. But this time, the town responded differently. The same neighbors who once gossiped organized bake sales and fundraisers. Parents she'd once taught wrote glowing letters. Former students shared stories of how she had changed their lives. The woman who wrapped me in a lavender blanket on that frozen February night became officially and legally my mother. Through her relentless advocacy, I started therapy with someone who specialized in generational trauma. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was processing. The flinching eased. Sleep came more regularly. Trust rebuilt itself, one slow, careful breath at a time. Some days still collapsed under the weight of memory, but others brought light. Small, unexpected moments where I caught a glimpse of the person I might become. Someone not defined by fear. 6 months after the ruling, I stood in a community center facing a modest audience. Mrs. Chang had encouraged me to speak at a local survivors event. At first, my voice trembled, caught on old wounds. But as I told my story, about breaking generational cycles, about the cost of silence and the strength it takes to tell the truth, my words found steady footing. The flinching was fading. In its place, resolve. Dad completed his required counseling and sent letters I never opened. Mom reached out through extended relatives. I deleted every message. Whatever we had been was over. What remained was fractured, but finally honest. Eli sent me a birthday card. No return address. Just a few words in familiar handwriting. Marissa posted vague reflections about healing on social media, never naming the cause, but the subtext was there. Julian graduated with honors. His essay on systemic injustice won state and national awards. He dedicated it to unnamed victims whose stories deserve to be heard. Mrs. Chang officially adopted me on a Thursday afternoon in a quiet courtroom with 5 witnesses. No cameras, no speeches, just papers making permanent what love had already defined. We celebrated afterward at the same pizza place where Dad once grabbed my wrist. The same teenage manager was still there. He gave us a quiet nod and free breadsticks. Small victories, ordinary miracles. The town moved on. Other headlines replaced us. Other scandals filled their conversations. Our story faded into the background noise of suburban life. Dad eventually returned to limited duty, his badge intact, his reputation forever stained. Mom got a job at a health clinic, trying to rebuild what was left of her world. The house, the one where Sunday nights meant bruises and belts, was sold. The proceeds split by court order. A new family moved in, unaware of the ghosts in the walls. I spoke at 3 more survivors' events in the months that followed. Each time my voice was steadier, my purpose clearer. And one day I realized I didn't brace when someone raised their hand too quickly. The flinching was gone.
There was no fame, no spotlight. Just small rooms filled with people who understood the heaviness of family secrets. Mrs. Chang always sat in the back, quiet, steady. Her presence a constant reminder that sometimes one person believing in you is enough to change everything. The cycle, the one that had wrapped around our family like barbed wire for generations, wasn't broken cleanly, but it was broken, imperfectly, irrevocably. My 18th birthday arrived with no fanfare, no cake with familiar names, no awkward reunions. Mrs. Chang made my favorite dinner. I filled out college applications at the kitchen table, ticking boxes labeled first-generation student and independent minor. The scholarship essays came easily. Overcoming adversity had become second nature. Julian texted me that day, just 3 words. Simple, quiet, and filled with everything he didn't know how to say. Marissa said nothing. Eli was off somewhere, probably dribbling a basketball across a clean court floor, still trying to untangle the meaning of love and loyalty. The future felt wide, unpredictable, but mine. Trauma would always be part of my story, but it would no longer be the whole thing. Mrs. Chang helped me pack for orientation, folding laundry with practiced care while discussing dining halls and elective credits. Normal conversations. Mundane, hopeful, felt revolutionary after so many years in survival mode. We didn't talk about the past that day. We didn't need to. We were busy building forward. As we loaded the car, I found the old calendar from under my mattress. Red for Julian, purple for Marissa, green for Eli. I thought about burning it. Dramatic closure for a brutal chapter. Instead, I placed it gently into a filing box, beside court transcripts and therapy notes. Not to carry the pain, but to remember the proof. The road to campus curved past the courthouse, the police station, the pizza shop, the grocery store, each place layered in memories I wasn't running from but no longer lived inside. Mrs. Chang drove with steady hands. Every time we neared a hard intersection, she reached over and gave mine a squeeze. We didn't need words. The understanding passed between us like breath. At the dorm, she helped me carry boxes to the small room I'd share with someone who didn't know about Sunday night punishments or family court dates. My new beginning came without apologies or backstory. Just the quiet, ordinary act of making a space mine, one untouched by fear. In the parking lot, she hugged me. We both cried. No shame in it. She saved me. Not just with testimony or legal battles, but with persistence, presence, love. That night, lying in my dorm bed, I didn't flinch when the air conditioner kicked on. My roommate snored gently across the room, unaware that my stillness was its own small miracle. Somewhere, my father was probably polishing metals that didn't shine the same way anymore. My mother, counting something other than lashes. My siblings, each in their own way, wandering through the wreckage. But I was here, 18, alive. Proof that cycles can break, even when the breaking feels like dying. The next morning, I joined a crowded dining hall filled with students trading complaints about early lectures and weekend plans. I sat among them, still carrying invisible scars, but no longer defined by them. My phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Chang. Just a string of heart emojis and gentle encouragement. I sent her a photo in return. My first college sunrise, soft gold light spilling over unfamiliar rooftops. It felt like a beginning. Mine, finally.